Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Session 10, Growing Australian Agriculture with First Nations People. My name's Madeline McCosker and I'll be chairing this panel today. First this morning, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on, the Ngunnawal people, and I also extend that recognition to the traditional custodians of the land of wherever we're all gathered today. Jumping straight in, according to the Australian government, 17% or 134 million hectares of land in Australia is Indigenous owned, and the same data showed that 22% of that is under some form of Indigenous management. But despite this, only 1% of the agricultural workforce identifies as Indigenous. So what more can we do to bring First Nations peoples and processes into the industry? And we have a great panel with us today to discuss this, and I'd love for them to introduce themselves. So to start off with, we have Suzanne Thompson.
Oh, I'm going first with this one, thanks. I'll firstly say Budal Mikini, Gatu Gaya, Namala, Kumbi Iningi, Central Queensland. So my name is Suzanne Thompson, but I say it's a good day today, and I'm Big Sister, and I'm of the Iningai people of Central Western Queensland. That is my country. And there's a couple of hats that I'll probably discuss today while sitting in this space. But I'm a practitioner in the realisation of managing country, and in particular in the Desert Uplands region of a cattle grazing operation, incorporating a variety of different income streams to realise our opportunity in the ag sector, and also as Indigenous landholders. And I'll share a little bit more as we go through around what I do, but thank you.
Lovely. So next to Suzanne, we have Natalie Somerville.
Hi everybody, you can call me Nat, I don't mind. I am a Waggatagam woman, now farming down in South Australia on Nudgee country in the mid-north, and so I farm grain and livestock and some horticulture as well. I've been doing that for over 20 years now, but have been in the agriculture sector my whole life, and really bringing the strength together of both, you know, natural resource management and agriculture with that cultural lens over the whole lot. So passionate about all of those things, but also the people within agriculture, and especially First Nations people, and how we can be better at working together and promoting benefits for First Nations mob.
Lovely. Thanks, Nat. And we have Josh Gilbert there beside her.
Hi everyone, we're Boo. I'm Josh Gilbert. I'm a Worimi man. I live and work on country, which is up in Gloucester on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. I am doing research at Charles Sturt University, which is supported by the Food Agility CRC, which is basically this topic in a nutshell, trying to understand mob's role, both historically post-colonisation, but also currently in terms of agriculture, and particularly involved in Western agricultural systems. From a small family farm, we have beef cattle, and this is really just my passion, making sure we have mob involved in the industry that we've been part of for 60,000 years, the oldest farmers here on this country, and have been working side by side with white fellas for the last 200 years. So for me, this is a really important yarn, one that we should have together, and one that's really important that we reflect on before taking giant strides forward, which is what we need.
Lovely. And beside Josh, we have Nini Mills, who's going to give a quick presentation.
Thanks, Maddie. Mabungoragarin, Gaji Gorijan, Gayu Nelowal Nini, Gayungan Gan Banaga Jando, Gayungamberlan Yarungan Buru, Gayu Bibi, Kujara Jenel, Nelowal Jera, Daji, Bigin Maya, Gayu Maja Jando, Nyambaburu Yarunedwa. Good morning, everyone. As introduced, my name is Nini Mills. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people of whose lands I stand on. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. In my Yawuru language, I stated that I'm a Banaga woman. Banaga is my skin and one of 4 groups within Yawuru's kinship system. I belong to beautiful Yawuru country, having been born and raised there. To the question to the audience, by way of show of hands, who knows where Yawuru country is? One person, two people? So if I was to tell you that the township of Broome, which is the largest town in the Kimberley region on the northwest coast of Western Australia, is located on Yawuru country. Now, by way of show of hands, who's been to Broome? Lucky are those that have travelled to my homelands, and those who haven't been there, your next holiday destination awaits you. So I'm the CEO of Nyambulburu Yawuru, which is the operating arm of the Yawuru Prescribed Body Corporate, representing Yawuru Native title holders of the Broome area. NBY holds a large operational remit, but today I'll be specifically talking to you about our cattle station. Our organisation, our company, is oversighted by a corporate group of 3 main boards and a few subsidiaries, so we're quite big on governance, both corporate and cultural. Our vision is to sustain a strong, proud, prosperous Yawuru community that is grounded in Bugarrigara. Bugarrigara, in a Western sense, can be described as the dream time, a past event, mythological times. However, from a Yawuru philosophical and spiritual viewpoint, Bugarrigara is not a past event. It represents our culture and all-encompassing elements that have been sustained since before time began. Bugarrigara is about connectivity to what was, what is, and what will be. A key focus on this forum, as highlighted through yesterday's presentations and this morning, has been on sustainability and how market trends and global politics and productivity and profitability and all that jazz, market trends, a lot of you economists in the room have much more expertise on than I, but that has a lot to do with the theme around sustainability or what impedes it. So this session today goes to the heart of sustainability from an Indigenous viewpoint, which is important given that we collectively as panel members are amongst the oldest surviving continual cultures in the world today, and that is a fact. Sustainability is in our DNA. Further to that note, I would like to pay my utmost respect and acknowledgement to the other panel members and to pay my respects to my elders who have sustained our culture since Bugarrigara, having passed wisdom from generation to generation. I also acknowledge my 2 sons in Yawuru language, who are the source of my inspiration. Today I'll showcase with you Yawuru's holistic development agenda, specifically as it relates to the management and operations of Gummarnganjal Roebuck Plains Station. But before I do, just by way of setting the scene for myself and the panel, I refer to a baseline study undertaken by ANU's First Nations portfolio and other collaborative partners that was done in 2022, of which I refer to the executive summary. The purpose of the situational analysis was to attain a better understanding of the relationship between First Nations primary production enterprises and the larger Australian primary industries, primarily focusing on agriculture. The study identifies that while a significant amount of primary production occurs on the First Nations estate, a significant majority of this is not undertaken by First Nations primary production enterprises. There is still a relatively small but emerging and unique First Nations primary production industry that is diverse, increasingly financially sustainable, and delivering significant cultural, environmental, social, and communal benefit for First Nations communities. There is an opportunity to grow the First Nations primary production industry so that it makes a significant and unique contribution to the growth targets of Australian primary industries beyond what the agricultural industry or the Australian government have contemplated previously. To achieve this mutually beneficial outcome for Australians, First Nations people and the agricultural industry, a concerted effort needs to be made to better understand the nature and extent of agricultural production that takes place on the Indigenous estate, the nature and extent of the First Nations primary production industry, opportunities to accelerate First Nations agricultural capacity development, and attraction of social impact and other ESG-orientated investment to the emerging sector. This effort needs to be overseen and driven by multi-stakeholder, mission-orientated industry development governance frameworks. There are a number of key recommendations to that report that I'd encourage everyone in the audience to take the time to look at. Now to the Yawuru example. The northern pastoral industry was built on the back of Maori people, on the labour of Aboriginal people. Often enslaved as workers or only given rations in payment for hard work, droving cattle across country. Despite these conditions, our old people's resilience, hope and vision for future generations is what has enabled Yawuru people to take our rightful ownership and management of Gomerungandjal, Roebuck Plains Station. The Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation purchased Roebuck Plains Station in 1999 to benefit Yawuru traditional owners. In 2006, the Federal Court determined that the whole of Roebuck Plains Station was to hold the unique status of exclusive possession Yawuru native title. Formal negotiations between Yawuru and the ILSC led to an agreement to divest the station to Yawuru. In February 2022, the station was formally divested, with Yawuru taking on ownership and management. With a multi-million-dollar turnover, strategic management of the station will deliver a significant income stream to the broader Yawuru corporate group and in turn contribute to the financial sustainability and independence of Yawuru people. Gomerungandjal holds a special place in the hearts and minds of Yawuru people, and we're excited to see prosperity from this venture delivered back to our community. Unlike mainstream organisations and businesses, our corporation has been developed in line with our cultural foundations and philosophies. This diagram on the screen visually depicts our Yawuru cultural framework, which embeds our strategic pillars being Mabuburu, healthy country, Diralngan Ngarungonil, strong community, Nalingan Manja, true prosperity, and Mudgalaini Nalingan, and that is about cultural and corporate governance. All of these pillars and operating units within BY are intrinsically linked and are grounded in our cultural values. We apply a holistic agenda as it relates to the interconnectedness of these pillars in line with our quadruple bottom line objectives, which is strategically intended to maximise on environmental, economic, cultural and social outcomes to achieve our mission, which is reflected in the outer circle of the diagram. Just on that one, so our mission is to sustain Mabu Lian for all always. Mabu means good or positive in Yawuru language, and Lian is a common language word used throughout the Kimberley region by many language groups, and that signifies the importance and strength of this word. But because it's widely used, it can be interpreted in many different ways. In Western terminology, it can be described as your soul, your spirit, your moral compass, your intuition, your well-being. So for us, we want to empower our community, and knowing that the individual empowerment leads to community empowerment, and so we want a strong, prosperous community that is grounded in our culture. So Gomerungandjal, Roebuck Plains Station, is currently NBY's biggest commercial enterprise. It covers 276,000 hectares, including the Roebuck Export Depot, strategically located for the export market on rich marine floodplain. It's just 30 k's east of Broome, out of town, only one road in, one road out, with the capacity to support a herd of up to 18,000 head of cattle. The PBC holds exclusive possession native title over the station, comprising a unique blend of values and multi-tenure arrangements. Yawuru's vision for Gomerungandjal is to deliver excellence in sustainable cattle production and integrate cultural, environmental, economic and social values to create prosperity for future Yawuru generations. A Yawuru Indigenous protected area sits over cultural jillas, waterholes. There's nationally significant springs and wetlands on our country, including an internationally significant Ramsar-listed wetland, all supported by a complex groundwater system connecting the landscape and flowing into Nagalagun, our saltwater marine park, which is jointly managed with Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. The soil and pastures of our station's marine plains provide highly productive lands for cattle grazing. Environmental accounting is emerging as an important tool for environmental management to show how landscape condition changes environmentally over time. Yawuru, with partners at the Australian National University, are assessing how environmental accounts can be developed and applied to support the environmental, cultural and economic management of Gomerungandjal. This advanced methodology is the first of its kind in the world. So we are very proud of our ability to apply traditional ecological knowledge and advanced Western science to come up with the best methodology and practices to look after our country. Yarra commits to social development and capacity building under Yarra ownership of the station and has seen record numbers of Yarra Indigenous people in the Aboriginal Pastoral Academy run through NBY's Wadmajala Mudgalai Rise Up to Work program, which is founded in Yarra's Mobulian philosophies. I understand that there was a session earlier around workforce development in the industry, and all I'd say, I didn't attend that, unfortunately, I missed it, but Indigenous engagement is fundamentally important to us all, so I encourage everyone to reflect on how participation can be increased. I won't go to operational achievements. What I'll say to wrap things up from my end before handing to the amazing panel is to say in the pipeline for Nyambulburu Yarra and the Yarra community as it relates to Gumrunganjal, we're moving forward towards completion of carbon baseline assessment to inform actions toward reaching carbon neutral production. This assessment will integrate the validation of assumptions around cattle methane production in partnership with the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. We're completing our ecologically sustainable rangeland management plan and embedding sustainable grazing practices into cattle management and operations. Development of a diversification master plan is underway to ensure the land value is maximised in a sustainable and considered approach. Development of co-innovation program partnership with Meat and Livestock Australia is progressing to understand market research and analysis, which we hope will reduce our exposure to live export market and consider diversification options. We continue to strive for business excellence, streamlining and improving efficiencies at Gumrunganjal, Roebuck Plains, and also Roebuck Export Depot once that acquisition is finalised this year. Finally, we are committed to innovation and sustainable futures underpinned by the quadruple bottom line. Gumrunganjal will be a cattle station like no other, achieving operational excellence and sustainable outcomes through the application of a holistic development model. Galamabu, thank you.
Thank you, Nini. Now, to get a bit of an idea, I guess, on where things are at currently, Josh, I want to head to you to get a bit of an idea, I guess, on the state of Indigenous employment. I had some statistics in my opening, but could you give us a bit of an idea of where it's at right now?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the challenges is that we don't actually have a lot of data, but the data that we have actually suggests that it's a little bit better than what the 1% that's thrown around. It actually says that we're about 2.5%. And there's some surprising kind of data that comes out of that. There's some areas that you probably wouldn't think that Indigenous employment is high or low, and actually just having that data is a really important step. So if you think about Indigenous employment, I think there's probably a general feeling that Indigenous employment in the ag and broader ag sector would be higher in the NT, and that's correct. About 12% of the workforce up there is represented with First Nations people, but it's actually surprisingly low in Victoria, about 0.5%, like a really low level. It's really high in Tasmania, 4%. So, you know, the actual state of Indigenous employment in this space is interesting. It shows that we need to do a lot of work. And similar, I think, to Amy's point before, you know, if you can't be what you can't see, and we haven't had a great history in terms of Australian agriculture of promoting Indigenous people in the agricultural space, other than prior to equal wages, where we're quite happy for blackfellas to be roaming around on pretty large stations, riding horses and paying them next to nothing. Stories of mob out there who get paid a bag of lollies for mustering for a whole month. So as we think about what does Indigenous employment look like today, we need to do a whole heap of work in addressing some of the historic narratives that's taken place. We need to actually address the way in which that operated. There's been some legal cases recently in Queensland and WA around repatriation of wages, which has been important. But we need to think about how do we actually activate this, you know, pretty untapped resource. Indigenous unemployment in rural and remote areas is high compared to non-Indigenous employment and unemployment. Sorry, and what that means is that when we've got agricultural organisations in rural, regional and remote towns, it would seem to me that the best place to be looking is where the unemployment rate is the highest, and the Indigenous youth is that demographic there. So we need to be really targeting young mob out in these areas to make sure that there are good work, that we have good workplaces and that we are able to attract them into the workforce.
And in the research that you're doing, what's it telling you, and particularly in that space that you just mentioned there with getting young Indigenous workers into the workforce, what is your research telling you?
It's a pretty untapped resource. So we have less than 5, and like the number 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Indigenous graduates from every university across Australia who study agriculture.
Wow.
It would take, to give you an idea as to how challenging some of these conversations are, it would take, based on the current levels of young people young Indian producers in America, it would take us 1,600 years to produce enough young people to graduate university just to come close to their current agricultural production in terms of young farmers that are producing a whole variety of different outputs over there. So we have a whole heap of steps to go to trying to attract people in, to show that this is an industry where mob should be engaged. And we should be, I think, looking at overseas to look at some of the ideas and opportunities that they present. So they've got young farmer programs where they give $5,000 to Indian producers over there to go out, buy a cow, show it at different shows. That's a huge positive step, I think, around something that we could be doing. And probably the other point I'd make is that we actually need to be better at supporting youth in agriculture generally. Mob are at the bottom row that miss out all the time, I think, generally. And what we need to do is be really clear around supporting youth in agriculture generally, and then being really focused around how we get young mob who are turning up to beef cattle events to show their cattle, and how do we actually attract them into the industry that they're obviously passionate about and support them through their career pathways. So to give you a really practical example, I'm the president of our Wing and Beef Week up at home. We struggled to get sponsorship from any organisation. It's been a really tough year, particularly this year. We get young Aboriginal kids that come and show their cattle, and it's really hard for us to keep sustaining an event that showcases youth in agriculture, and particularly it's really hard to show young mob that they belong in that space, because often I think they get forgotten about. So there's a lot of work to be done. What
more can the industry do to make it a welcoming space for young Indigenous kids?
There's a lot. So the data generally around Indigenous employment in Australia, it shows that the biggest data set that has been gained, the Garryella report that came out 3 years ago, surveyed over 1,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across Australia about their experiences at work. Over half of those people experience racism at work. And I would say, just by anecdotal advice, that the agricultural sector is probably pretty bad in that we have people who are selling bulls to different producers who the farmer rocks up to pick up their bull, sprays a whole heap of racism about Aboriginal people who are trying to take over their country, and a whole heap of expletives used, and that person, an Aboriginal farmer, is on the front lines of having to try and deal with that. I've been to diversity events in the ag sector where we have organisations who have just developed their apps who say things like, "Oh, I managed a part Aboriginal person once." That's the kind of language that's been used. I've heard acknowledgements and welcomes to countries booed, and we know that mob in some instances are getting $1 less per kilo for their beef compared to their next door neighbours. So this is a real challenge, I think, for the industry as a whole to address. There's a lot of work to be done, and what the research of the Garryella shows is that the best thing that we can do is create a whole heap more events for blackfellas. We need all agricultural organisations to be having reconciliation action plans. They need to be having NAIDOC Week events, Reconciliation Week events. They need to actually really focus on Indigenous diversity in their workforces, and what that will do is create a better culture going forward.
And Nat, I want to move on to you for a bit as well, and I'm curious to hear from you about traditional farming methods and what we can learn from that as a modern agricultural system.
Okay, look, I guess I had a whole presentation planned, but I'm just going to chop it because I think the flow of this panel is really important, and I'm happy to go straight to the chase about traditional farming practices and how that can strengthen our modern ag systems. So it's really important to set the scene. So I might just go back to my heritage first.
Please.
And so Waggatagum is, or our people are from an island in the Torres Strait called Mabiug. And you might think, you know, blue seas, stunning beaches, awesome seafood, but there's actually a really strong connection to agriculture as well. So we've done the Western studies and shown that, 2,000 years ago we had cultivated bananas in our systems amongst a lot of other production systems as well. So if you can, understand that layer of love for growing and connection to country and land and sustainability, I think, this helps frame this whole conversation. So what happens when you are removed from your traditional country? It creates a whole other layer of cultural issues and social issues as well. So when we talk about, next door, when we're talking about labour and that we can have farms and farms, we don't have to own it, it is a real tension point for mob who don't get to farm their own countries. And so I'm farming not on my traditional country, I'm farming on Nudgee country, which is not my traditional country, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of Nudgee. That's their story to tell. But what I can say is that freehold land where we farm is really, really expensive to get into. And so that connection to land is really important to understand, and being able to, grow that food or walk that country and manage country using those methods that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. And I know Suze will talk about this, so I won't steal your thunder.
You're right, sister. Compliment well.
But, Nudgee mob, they've been, they were forced off that country from really early on in the piece. And I'm not going to say they haven't been around, because that's the presumption that they haven't been around. Of course they've been around. We just, it's like the snakes. You don't see them. They're there and they walk the country. But then, it's not, I guess for, the farmers out there, they don't necessarily, see mob on country per se. But they still have that connection to country. And some of that traditional knowledge, may need to be re-established, as, they've got the fire sticks mob going around, sort of re-establishing and retraining other mob how to do the cool burns. As an example, other mob have been doing it for thousands of years and continue to do so. So when we talk about, our current farming systems, which are very broad, so you've got your dairy systems to your grain systems to your other livestock systems and everything else in between, it is a really complex answer, a question to answer. And it's a bit like putting that jigsaw puzzle back together again and go, well, how can we influence this space? And how can we influence over here? And it has to be holistic. But first of all, it's access to country. That's the number one thing that we need to allow here. Protection of cultural, heritage. That's the other thing. Because that, it's a scary thing for the average farmer, which I understand, but there's a lot of farmers out there that do understand the importance of that and how it strengthens not only the relationship of the current generations, but relationships for the future generations as well. So it's about developing trust before we can jump straight to traditional knowledge on country and how we can improve our ag systems. look, the other thing I wanted to say is there's different ways we can help influence the growing of Australian ag with First Nations people. And one of the other things that I do in my role, I'm very passionate about is influencing at industry level. So I guess I'm a part of quite a few industry boards. The National Farmers Federation is one of those as an independent director. We are definitely working behind the scenes in Indigenous engagement and in that space, and there is a great team which have, formed out of our membership. So I think it's really refreshing to be able to say that, and that we are really serious about strengthening and working together in this space. And I know you'll talk later about some of the projects that have been happening and are happening at the moment, and a call to action as well. I'm also the president of Australian Women in Agriculture, which for me, as a First Nations farmer, is fantastic because it was a really inclusive space I could step straight into and understand that I will be supported no matter what. So when you talk about that cultural safety, it's really important to make sure that all of our organisations are really, understanding that. And I'm probably preaching to the converted already here, right? Thank you for being in the room listening to us, because it's really important. But I can't emphasise enough that relationships are built on understanding and trust. And to do that, we need to understand that cultural side of things and making sure those spaces are safe. GRDC is another board that I've recently been appointed to, and I'm happy to also say that they have announced their RAP. So they are at the Reflect level, which is the start of that RAP journey, Reconciliation Action Plan. In case I'm not sure of that term. So for GRDC, it's a real step in the right direction, and it's going to guide them and their work and what they do moving forward. So I'm really, it's great to see an organisation, one of the RDCs, one of the 15 research development corporations that are doing amazing work. And I could talk and talk and talk, but I think I'll leave it there. So I just wanted to say that, influencing agriculture and the growth of agriculture for First Nations people is at lots of multiple levels, and one of them is within industry. Thank you.
And this question is for Josh, but I would love to open it up to the rest of the panel and talk a little bit about the role of truth-telling within the agricultural industry, if you wouldn't mind touching on that. Josh?
I think the yarns behind agriculture are important. And I met with a minister recently who was talking about the story behind the story, and that really reflected to me that that while you might get the initial story, that there's a lot more behind what you might be being told. Our country 200 years ago this year was gifted 1 million acres to a large agricultural company that still exists today. Within 10 years of that agricultural company forming on the lands, our people were involved in massacres where they were jumped off cliffs, where during really tough times a mob were trying to kill cattle to be able to eat. The company had a direction to put arsenic in damper to make sure that mob were thinned out on that land. And over a series of years later, our relationship kind of dwindled, and now that country is a country that doesn't acknowledge Worimi people. It actually has a plaque up on the sign as you drive into the town that says, "This town was proudly founded by the company name." So I think it's important that, while we have that connection to our country and we maintain that there is these subtle kind of hints around the truth of what happened, and agriculture played a key role in that. That organisation at the time had a policy direction and their strategic plan that said that they would cultivate the wastelands of New South Wales. And I certainly don't think our country is wasteland. I look at it now and look at the Gondwana rainforest in the high country and how beautiful it is, and the stunning beaches that we have over at Foster Tuncurry that, kind of encapsulate our shores. So these are the yarns that we need to kind of unpack, and one of the 3 pillars of the Uluru Statement is truth-telling, and we need to make sure that we do this in a way that's respectful and mindful, that we acknowledge agriculture's role in that, and that we actually are able to learn and have those conversations in a really respectful way. As Nat said, you have organisations that start on their reflect rap journey, and one of the first things about reflection is to think about the role in which these organisations had in some of these efforts. So there's a lot to reflect upon. There's a lot of good stories as well. A lot of mob who worked in an industry that they absolutely love, who were so dismayed by equal wages because that meant that they had to get kicked off their stations, that where their connection to country was. So we need to unpack all of that and then think about what that means for an industry that is really rooted in that kind of history in Australia, and think proactively around how we work together to come out the other side. Because for me, on my country, we know Worimi mob have been farming for the last 60,000 years, and I feel like my role is to just be the placeholder for the next 60,000 years, to do all I can to make sure mob can keep farming there. So we need to do that together. We need to do that in terms of agriculture and how it stands today. And we need to come together and really think about that proactively and positively so that we can get the good outcomes, so that we can continue doing that.
And there's been mention a couple of times of reconciliation action plans, and I'd like to, for each of you, if you wanted to speak on the role that they play within the industry. We're seeing, more and more companies coming on board with that, but how vital do you think it is that companies and organisations and businesses take that step in recognition?
Can I?
Of course.
Sure. And I got a bit of a presentation talk, which when you asked the questions and stuff that I'd sort of put up. But I think, and what I was going to start my story and my presentation with is to ask the very question and to be mindful of that a man and a woman had a conversation with a snake is what we believe about not eating an apple. What culture was that man and woman? What language did that snake speak? And were apples around? Because my truth, our truth is that we have evidence of those things, our stories, our parables, our dream times, our myth, our very action and participation in this world and this continent are etched and have been etched and have stayed there for 60,000 plus years. So I ask that question when we're thinking of truth-telling and how we unpack back from that. Where do we sit as First Australians in this space, in this continent that we were taken out of? And I think within that then, that's, I suppose, the way I'll respond to that very idea of then what is reconciliation. And I think it is coming back to reconcile with that, with all of our values. Because at the end of the day, as humans, it is those values that we carry forward in order to survive together. So, thank you.
If you would like to give your presentation now as well, Suzanne. while we've got you.
Sure. So, and probably starting, because there was the question that I'd sort of put there of how do I see, so what would it take to realise a sustainable Australian native foods and botanical industry? So the green hat at the moment I'm wearing as the chair of the Australian Native Foods and Botanical Industry. That's been around for 25 plus years, and probably at times has had a sprinkling of, us sitting in that space. But how did we feel culturally safe? How do we feel a part of something? And how do we bring our knowledge to that table that's respected? So of course then, I've been involved for the last 6 years and been really fortunate to be sitting as the chair, but it's not been an easy job because it's also convincing the ag sector, AgriFutures and places like that, that this is actually a sustainable industry for Australia. So if we go and we think about the peak body, sorry, I'm just going to put this up because I can't see that far down on that little screen that they've got there. So as a peak industry body, what we did is we went about developing a strategic plan. And what did that strategic plan look like? And one of the challenges within that is how do we ensure equal participation for our First Peoples of this land, and how do we respect their knowledge, and in particular with benefit sharing? How do we actually start to address this IP trademarking? It's our knowledge, we're not going to share it, well, we've taken it, and Australia has lost lots of our Australian bush botanical products overseas. So there's been a variety of things that as a peak industry body we've led in the development of the finger lime industry. We do a lot of research around all of these particular different industries that we see are morphing up out there, whether it's even the lemon myrtle or now the Kakadu plum industry. So the wattle seed, and what is the opportunities through wattle seed. But this has all been through a voluntary board that has basically survived off doing research development work, but not seen as an industry peak body and funded and resourced as such. We know that wattle is a sequester of carbon. It's a nitrogen fixer, but we know that there are many benefits that can come from wattle seed, in particular for the land owner of country. And I know that's something that we witness as we look at our fire stick regimes, and we know, and I heard the story earlier about, sat in the session around pollinators. And I felt for our little wild bees that are out there in abundance, but I think of the many different practices of pollination, and not just our insects, but it's through those ancient cultural practices that sustained this land, these plants, so that we could sustain for many millennia. And those are the things that are missing from that conversation. Hence why then it is important that we consider this peak body as an opportunity for us to look at an emerging industry, but I think something that will help us to survive into the future as climate variation comes, as we are faced with an extinction period, because that's what we are faced with. It's not a climate change, it is an extinction period that we're faced with. So, of course, our vision we've put up there, and I'm happy to share these slides with anybody. I'll just go through because I'm mindful of time. I'll talk for lots. And then, of course, that's our strat plan, one-pager, strat plan, people and partnerships, how we looked at that. But investment and growth is crucial. We need our industry taken seriously, because what it's done is it's spent the time to bring the two knowledge sets together in a respected way of how we're able to move through drought, environmental change, cool burns, and what can we do when we're thinking about the response of cool burns. I watch and witness the development of a monoculture of a black wattle because we've done a cool burn, but I also know the values of that ecological system that sits within that on country. That's the knowledge that we can bring as First Nations people to the ag sector, because we carry and continue that ancient knowledge of this land of surviving for millennia. So this last bit here, and because I've got more slides to share. So when we think about, and Nat, thanks for sharing that, talking about our culture and our very sense of how we traded, and listening again to the pollinators and thinking, oh, we can't cross the border because of biosecurity. For us, that actually does our head in, how this country's been structured. The closest we can get, and the closest I could get to showing what our cultural governance was, that linked us up to a songline and a story that we governed through ceremony and understanding marriage systems, understanding migratory bird patterns, understanding watersheds and land types. That's the knowledge that we carry. It's innately in us. Then there's our watersheds of Australia. My mob, we're at the beginning of the Lake Eyre Basin system. So everything we do on country is vital for that one life force. We've got the Murray-Darling, it's merged itself. So as we're thinking of biosecurity, as we're thinking of our participation and the knowledge that we bring to this table, it's that sort of knowledge we bring. We are the ancient scientists that have sustained this land for millennia. And what we do is we ask for that rightful place to sit there and to be a part of that. So then I think we truly can participate in the ag sector equally when that knowledge is shared. Because remember, at the beginning, we have a belief that a man and a woman had a conversation with a snake, but we find it so challenging to believe what we have as knowledge. And I'll share a bit more about that as I go through, when we're thinking about some of the other questions, and I'll start to talk about the carbon farming we're doing on country and also these opportunities that we've got, but also about our law story and the importance that pretty much unpacks this here. So thank you.
Yeah, if you want to go into that, we've got about 10 minutes. So.
Oh, well, I'll keep flowing. So where I live and where our country is part of the Desert Uplands region of central western Queensland, and it was the coastline. The Inangai people were the coastline of the ancient inland sea. We were the beachgoers back then. What we have on our country, which we've been afforded, and thank you to the ILSC for doing that, and acknowledging and recognising our cultural values first and foremost before a cattle operation or buying a property up was the cultural value. So what we have on our property with the Marawonga, which is the place of many stories wall, is the Seven Sisters law story etched over 180 metres long. It has a meteorite on it that tells us when megafauna extinction happened. It tells us about our intricate songlines that wove across this land. It tells us how we can look. I can look at landscape when we are taught, when we are given that very opportunity to go back and reconnect with our country, reconnect with our culture, reawaken that ancient knowledge that sits within us, then we understand this intricate pattern. So we think about the Old Testament, the first law story, the Seven Sisters. We have Pleiades. We all have a connection to star systems, whatever culture we come from. We hold the oldest knowledge of that, but all you other fellas have got your interpretation for your plot. And that's how we unpack it. But if we think about then, the Seven Sisters cruised around and they created that cultural landscape, the springs, Uluru and Katachuta are mud pies in the story. That's where we are, Desert Uplands region. One of the three most variable regions of rainfall and climate variation in all of the world. It houses 70 to 80% of Australia's arid zone plant species. So I think about the opportunity and the knowledge that that wall has captured for us. And just some evidence of some of the stuff you'll see. Up the top there, you'll see the big footprints. Now those footprints are from the tip of my finger to my elbow, etched, telling the story of Watanuti, the trickster, the shapeshifter. Why we did ceremony, when we should marry, who we should marry. All of that is part of our one system. So as we're thinking about all of our systems, it's thinking about that and being mindful of that. What we do is our direction is we're caring for country, harvesting on country and guesting on country. We don't do a tourism experience, it's a guesting experience on country. Come and have that experience and immerse yourself. That's the difference. But this is what happens when we have the opportunity to be truly self-determined and to own our own block of dirt and manage it our way. So this was our carbon farming plot. This is the property. So this is the map of the property, and then we've got the carbon. So this was the property back in 2019 when we started our project. It had been cleared. A large portion of our property was cleared, and so through our carbon project, I thought it was pretty cool at the beginning that we were getting paid to watch the grass grow back and trees after the mob before us come in and took it off us, massacred our people, because we talk about truth-telling, but we get the chance to come back with it and get paid to heal it. And of course then, we can see we started to put our plots in, and then as we cruise through, it starts to vary and change for us as we go. And now we've got too much grass. I don't believe we can have too much grass, but we've got too much grass. Because the moment we also started to introduce our cool burning practices, so we don't burn when everybody else burns. We burn because it's desert country, so it's that knowledge. We're not savannah. Every bioregion watershed is unique to its own region. The practices are unique to that region. That's that sharing of that knowledge. So for us then, with the cool burns, and you can see up here, and I like to share, so you'll see the fence line, and you'll see over there, you can see it quite scorched. That's our neighbour who burnt 4 days after us because he didn't want us to help him. This side, that's our burn 4 days before. Huge difference, isn't there? We want to share. But I watch them fly across in their helicopters because, hey, what would that little black girl know up there in the desert running that property? She really wouldn't know much. You know you're still green, Suze. Oh, I thought we were dry. No. And the helicopters are flying over. Then we'll get rain and we sit now on our escarpment, which you can see down the bottom here, and we'll watch all the fires around the neighbourhood. And there's a patch of burnt over there. That was our neighbour. Wrong way fire. He nearly burnt us out, but luckily we prepared and nothing will burn us because of our land management practice. But the way we do that, we're looking after our pollinators. We're aware that the cool burn and the smoke and all the many different functions and ways of pollinating our country. So of course then we go, there we go. Back, and then of course the infrastructure is part of our carbon project of putting in, redefining our paddocks, reducing it, you know, better cattle management, better water points, learning more about that because we're not cattle people. We're Indigenous land managers. But we're able to learn and acquire the knowledge that's required to sustain our land. And of course you can see wrong way fire again. And then we start to capture, of course, the co-benefits that come through the nature-based solution opportunities through our carbon project. So we were part of the Queensland Government's pilot land restoration project. And so that meant the HIR, the one that got thrown out, it was quite a challenge, you know, because we think, wow, but we're doing a really good HIR project. And where does that fit? So, of course, then the sharing of our knowledge, the many places that we've gone, the research, realising through our bush medicines project, so we're not just looking at one function on our land, we're looking at the many functions of how we balance out our land and the value of that and what it can provide to us. So we're not putting so much pressure just on one. So of course we've just had some major discoveries, and I'm really excited about our Gidgee discovery of the resin and the gum within that. We used as a medicinal plant, a resin for our toothaches and whatnot, and it's now been discovered, and the discovery is as an emulsifier, Australia's own unique, because I can say that, because our paper's published and it's about to get serious investment. Can you imagine when we start to value our trees, our very environment, when we know, back to the Australian Native Foods and Botanical, 6,800 Australian native botanical plants that have dual purposes. But that knowledge that we can share, that opportunity that sustains us, when we're thinking about food security into the future, what does that look like? I think about the nut industry and I think about the boab nut. I start to think about our native nuts and what we have. I heard the story about the almonds, but is that water? What are the things? Are we really sitting down and really wanting to hear the knowledge that First Australians have to offer?
We've only got a couple of minutes.
That's it, thank you.
Look at that. Perfect
Done.
timing.
Thank you.
Before we do finish up, we have a bit of a presentation from NFF coming up shortly, but I just wanted to ask each of you for sort of some final thoughts on, I guess, what this space could be, what the future of agricultural, Indigenous agriculture could look like in the future. How do you see that? Who?
I think I just answered it. I think it's a shared space. I think there's so much we can learn through that, and I think it's bringing the two sciences and the two knowledge sets together. I think that's the exciting challenge ahead.
Anyone else want to answer?
Yeah, look, I think I think it's happening already, and I think there's some really great good news stories out there that need to be promoted, where non-Indigenous and Indigenous, peoples are working together. I think we can encourage that more by, obviously, on the back of last year's referendum and some cultural heritage laws that got really bad publicity and conversations and not understanding each other. I think we can certainly work in those areas to move forward in a better way. So I think it can be a positive story, and it is a positive story, but it can be strengthened as long as we have those courageous conversations and understanding and some really good leaders in this space.
Josh, Nini, anything to add?
I'd say we need to develop our own Australian mythos around what Australian agriculture should be. We need to get rid of the old white guy on a white horse wearing a white hat or, riding an old bike somewhere with a dog on the back, and actually develop that into something that we can all be proud of, that shows our diversity of people, the way in which we operate on these lands, and the way in which we could farm here. And I would frame that by saying what we need to do is develop a truly Australian agricultural story, something that acknowledges our mob, all of our stories in the broader conversation of Australian agriculture. And for us to be able to do that, we need our own self-determination. We need our own methods and our own ways of rocking up to the table and having not just a seat, but a leadership role in the way in which we have those yarns so that we can do that together.
Yes.
In summary, from me, Maddie, the lovely lady from NAB who was presenting earlier today talked about 3 C's of credit, right? Character, collateral, and capacity. So in summary, I put forward the 3 R's, which represent us that recognition matters, representation matters, and relationship matters. So thank you for the opportunity for all of us today.
Yeah, well, thank you all for being here today and sharing with us. Before we do go, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and the NFF has sent through some slides for a project that they are working on. So have we got those slides?
Can I just add to me, just with that? Because I think, and Nat, you brought that up around the, last year and the referendum and things. And for me, I probably tend to steer around it because of where I live. I live in the heart of Cedar, Maranoa. The lowest in the country, where I still sit in my hotel hearing F and Black Coons. Okay, that's the reality. Do I feel safe to want to share my knowledge? Helicopters fly over my ass to do field days on the property. Oh, do I really want to? How do we mend that? Because because everything's still flowing, but we've still got a healing that needs to happen, because I don't know who to trust now.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so under DAF's National Traceability Scheme, the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation and the NFF have been contracted to deliver Australia's first Indigenous agricultural product framework. As a key outcome, the project will help to deliver ongoing prosperity for Indigenous peoples through value adding for both domestic and exported products, including a fairer return across the supply chain. 2, increase the opportunity for specialist farmers, producers and processors to enter export markets, especially those involved in exporting boutique premium products. 3, help deliver ongoing respect, recognition and growth to all Indigenous Australians through jobs and employment. The objective of this project includes enabling First Nations people to define Indigenous agricultural product for the purposes of agricultural trade, recognition and benefit, to clarify the benefits, gaps and industry maturity and export opportunity for those products, and providing key actions and governance requirements to translate the concept into recognisable Indigenous agricultural credentials. The project is gathering diverse perspectives and has begun close consultation with Indigenous and non-Indigenous individuals, organisations and communities throughout the country to confirm broad support for identifying what makes a product Indigenous and to inform for establishing a credential system to enable differentiation in markets. The project will also look at products already being made for sale locally and abroad and the rules they have to follow and gather information on the challenges businesses face in following these rules. It will further study how promoting Indigenous products could benefit the economy and communities and how Indigenous businesses can add value to their products. The project is also looking into exploring technology options for tracing the origin of those products. Thank you very much for being here today. If you want to learn more about that, you can use the QR code that's on the slide to visit the page, which can be found on the NFF website. And that has more information
Can
there.
I just say quickly, sorry, as
Yes.
independent director of NFF, this is a really important project to ask the question, do we need this? What is an Indigenous product? And will it benefit mob? So it's really critical that we do the consultation right, get the engagement done properly to inform this particular project. And it's not just talking about bush foods because, ag products goes way beyond bush foods, but it's a really important component of it. So that is why NFF has been engaged with DAF and ILSC on this project. So a call to action is to reach into your networks and get them to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. And a round of applause for the panel for being here today.